Okay, so I'm going to get started here. Tlahaya Conway Tillicum, Ab Nikanim, Nikamitlite Kitimat, BC. Hello, everyone. My name is Ab, and I live in Kitimat, British Columbia. So I'm going to get started this course with, I'm going to share my screen here, and I have a PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to take you through. So I'll share that. It should be up on the screen now. So this is the introduction to Chinook jargon. So I should mention first off that I am not an expert in the Chinook jargon. I'm studying it and I've been learning a fair bit about it. And basically this class is, well, its main purpose is for me to share what I know so far about Chinook jargon. And the way I've planned this is I'm going to have at least one session made up of 5 classes, and then I'll see how things go from there. So starting with the first slide here, we have some introductions. I just wanted to go around and have people talk a little bit about themselves. So I have a couple of questions here. The first one is Tlaxta Micah. That means, who are you? And the second question is Ka Micah Tigi Kumdux Chinook Wawa. What do you want to know or learn about Chinook jargon, or what interests you about Chinook jargon? So basically, the questions are, who are you and why are you here? So I'm going to ask my mother, who has joined me here, to say a little bit about herself. So you can go ahead.
Deborah Clan Nugwa. I'm here to learn as much as I can about the Chinook jargon. Thank you.
So the question on this first slide is, what is Chinook jargon? So this is a trade language that was developed on the Pacific Northwest coast in the late 1800s. It's comprised of a few different languages that existed prior. The main part of it is made up of Chinook, which makes up about 50% of Chinook jargon. I'll explain a little bit more about that later. It's also partly made up of Nuchanus, which comes from indigenous nations in southern BC on the southeastern side of Victoria, or of Vancouver Island, and other areas around there. It also comes from French. There are some words directly imported from Canadian French. There are some English words that were imported into Chinook jargon and some other languages here and there that make up the rest of the vocabulary in Chinook jargon. So in terms of the terminology, it can get a little bit confusing because people talk about Chinook jargon. Usually they say Chinook and they're talking about Chinook jargon. But this is different than the Chinook language. So what makes it different is that Chinook jargon is more simplified. So for basically for clarity's sake, what I'll do is when I'm talking about Chinook jargon, I will say Chinook jargon. If I'm talking about Chinook language, I'll basically call it Chinook proper. So Chinook jargon versus Chinook proper. And Chinook proper was a full language that was spoken around the Columbia River region. So Chinook proper and Chinook jargon are not the same. They are different languages. And another thing that you should keep in mind is that Chinook jargon is not a full language. It is what's referred to as a pidgin. The word jargon can actually be a little bit misleading. So the next few slides will talk a little bit more about that. So you may be asking yourself, what is a pidgin? So a pidgin language is a grammatically simplified communication method. It usually develops when 2 or more groups have to develop a system of communication when a common language doesn't exist. It is common when communities come together for trade and they are not considered complete languages. Pidgins are not native to any speech community. It is built from the words and sounds from a number of languages with a limited core vocabulary. So that's the definition of a pidgin, and that describes Chinook jargon. In terms of the word jargon, there's a couple of different definitions of it. So the historical definition is what is on this first slide here. So I'll just read this out to you. In colonial history, jargon was seen as a device of communication to bridge the gap between two speakers who did not speak the same tongue. Jargon was synonymous with pidgin in naming specific language uses. So it's a little bit different than a pidgin. So if you look, and that's more of a historic definition of jargon. So on the next slide, there's a more modern definition of jargon, and this refers to a specialized technical language of a particular subject. And this comes from the Collins Canadian Dictionary. Essentially, this is a terminology. So if you think of different professions, like the legal profession, they have what's called legal jargon. So words like plaintiff and defendant are words that are specific to the legal profession. So that's legal jargon. If you think of the medical profession, you hear words like diastolic or thrombosis. Those are words that are specific to the medical profession. So that is medical jargon. And it applies to all kinds of different areas. So there's anything that refers to a specific practice or anything along those lines would be referred to as a jargon related to that subject. So basically, it's a collection of related words with specialized meanings. So you're not going to hear the words plaintiff or defendant used very much outside of the legal profession, or words like diastolic or thrombosis used outside of the medical profession. So they're used specifically in those areas of study or the profession. So in this sense, you can't really take words in a jargon and put them into sentences because, for one thing, the vocabulary is too limited, and also there's no grammar involved in it. So you can't really make a sentence entirely out of legal jargon. There's specific words that you can put in there, but you're going to have to incorporate them into an English sentence in order for them to work. So that's kind of the more modern definition of a jargon. So that's why the name Chinook Jargon can be a little bit misleading, because Chinook Jargon is not a jargon as we see it today. So the next slide will go into more detail about what Chinook Jargon actually is. Actually, that was the pidgin. I think I put these slides in the wrong order. So I should have talked about a pidgin first, or a pidgin second. Jargon should have come first and then pidgin. So basically, you have in levels, if you think of language in levels, you have like a jargon here. The next level up is a pidgin. And then up above that is what we see here on this slide, which is a Creole. So in terms of a definition, a Creole does not have a direct ancestor or a single parent language. Instead, it evolves from a pidgin language, which is a simplified form of communication used by people who do not share a common language. Over time, when a pidgin becomes the first language of a community and is passed down through generations, it transforms into a fully developed Creole language. So that's kind of the evolution. So you have a jargon, then a pidgin, and then a Creole after it. So in terms of variations, you'll hear Chinook jargon referred to by different terms. So you might hear someone say Chinook jargon. You could hear somebody else say Chinook Wawa. The word Chinook might be spelled differently. So you can see this last one here. It's spelled with a U instead of two O's. You might hear different pronunciations. You might hear Chinook Wawa versus Chinook Wawa. Either way, it refers to the same thing, which is the Chinook jargon. And there are two different dialects. There's a northern dialect and southern. So the northern dialect is what we call a pidgin, and this is specific to the Kamloops area and the BC coast. And that's what this course is based on. So this course focuses on the northern dialect of Chinook Jargon. So it's simpler, and it doesn't have a standard writing system or standard pronunciation. The southern dialect is a Creole, and this is spoken in the Grand Ronde area, so the Columbia River area in Oregon, down in the United States. So what makes this a Creole is that it's a more stable language, it's more complex. It does have a standard writing system and pronunciation, and it's being taught in the Grand Ronde area. So children are being taught this as they're growing up, and it has a more complicated, complex grammar than Chinook Jargon in the North area does. So that's a basic comparison between the two dialects. You've probably heard some words being used in Chinook Jargon in everyday speech, especially here on the Northwest Coast. So some places like Caldas Lake. Caldas Lake is in the Fraser Valley near Chilliwack. Caldas means worthless. And you might wonder why it's called Worthless Lake. Well, it's because that area has really strong winds. So that's the meaning behind Caldas Lake. It's seen as worthless land because the winds are so high there. There's also Skookumchuck Narrows, and this is the entrance to the Seashelt Inlet. So Skookum means strong, Chuck means water, and these words together translate to rapids. So Skookumchuck means strong water, which is the equivalent of rapids in English. There's also Siwash Rock in Stanley Park, which is in Vancouver. The word Siwash comes from the French sauvage, and this refers to Indigenous people. It's actually, so you can see it comes from French. That's one of the words that was imported from French into Chinook Jargon. So those are some common place names that you might have heard. Some other words that you might have encountered in everyday speech include muckamuck. This means food or to eat. So when somebody says hi muckamuck in today's English vernacular, it refers to a person of high standing. It actually comes from hayu muckamuck. So in Chinook Jargon, hayu means much or plenty, and then muckamuck means food. So hayu muckamuck means plenty of food or a lot of food. The word potlatch means to give. The word skookum means strong. The word tillicum means people or friend. So here in this area, I live in Kitimat. In Terrace, they have tillicum twin theaters. So that's where the word tillicum comes from. It comes from people or friend. The word stick is something you might have heard before, and it means tree or wood. So if somebody says they're out in the sticks, that means they're out in the woods or out in the middle of nowhere, not close to a city. There's also tai, which means chief or king. So if you think of words like tai salmon is a king salmon or spring salmon. Also, the word oolican is thought to originate from Chinook Jargon, but from my research, it looks like it comes from the word ulchun or ulchun. And this is a regional variation of the Grand Ronde dialect. So it's not commonly known. It's only spoken in certain areas of Oregon. But that's where I believe the word oolican, the English word, actually comes from, ulchun, in the Chinook Jargon that's spoken in Grand Ronde. There's also some Haisla words that come from Chinook Jargon. So Guaso comes from Kosho, which means pig. Miss Moose comes from moose moose, which means cow. Kiwadun comes from Kiwatan, which means horse. Dala comes from Dala, which means money. Deled comes from Delet. You can also hear Dret sometimes, and that means really in Chinook jargon. And the way we refer to Chinook jargon in Haisla depends on the dialect that you're speaking. So if you're speaking GM, which is the Kamano dialect, it's Tunukwala, Tunukwala. And then the Haisla dialect, it's Tunugwakyala, Tunugwakyala. I also wanted to mention that I have a dictionary website that I'm developing called Conaway Wawa. And this is basically a Chinook jargon compendium. And there's the web address here you can go to later on. You can search from the homepage by typing a word and choosing either Chinook jargon or English. And you can also browse entries alphabetically using either Chinook jargon or English. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. It looks like I'm actually running out of time in my presentation here. I understood that I was going to have 40 minutes for the class in Zoom, but it's been telling me that I have less than a minute. So I'm not sure why that is.